Joining us now, White House correspondent for PBS NewsHour, Yamiche Alcindor, politics editor for the Daily Beast, Sam Stein, and staff writer for The Trace, a nonprofit news organization that focuses on gun violence in the United States, Mike Spees, who's out now with a new report co-published by The New Yorker on the internal financial dealings at the NRA. And what a report it is.
Mike,
thanks for being with us.
Shocking. I mean, just shocking, the mismanagement. Again, and this is it's great that we have you here on the same day as Trump tax returns. You can call it fake news. It's all numbers.
Right.
It's all math.
On paper.
It's all on paper.
Right.
It's all on black and black and white. And it's uncontrovertible. It's the same thing with your, because I'd heard you work for a group that focused on gun violence, and I said, okay, how slanted is this going to be? And halfway through, I said, oh my God, this is all in black and white. The financial mismanagement inside the NRA is staggering. The self-dealing,
right?
It's really sleazy.
Right.
Tell us about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a culture that's marked by self-dealing, greed, secrecy, bloated payments, lavish pay packages to vendors. Something that's been going on for, I don't know, a couple decades, basically since Wayne LaPierre rose to power in the NRA in the early 90s.
So who benefits off of these deals? Who's making millions off of these, again, internal sort of self-dealing episodes?
The NRA's senior management and the vendors and contractors who are very close to them. Also people who, what tends to happen is folks who worked for the NRA for a long time at a high level, when they stop working for the NRA, they actually continue on despite being retired with lucrative consulting contracts that are also worth hundreds of thousands of dollars.
So give us some specifics on the self-dealing.
Oh, well, it's hard to, I guess we can pick one place to start would be with Ackerman McQueen, which is the NRA's longtime public relations firm. Basically created Wayne LaPierre. All the messaging that you're familiar with comes from Ackerman McQueen. They've got a revolving door. Some 25% of NRA employees are managed by former Ackerman folks. Former Ackerman folks work for the NRA. Former NRA people go to work for Ackerman. People who hold executive positions at the NRA also have stakes in Ackerman affiliated
So how much
companies.
money does Ackerman make?
In 2017, the most full accounting that we know of, that came to more than $40 million.
So they make more than $40 million. They also pushed NRA TV.
They created it. They produced it. They created it. They pay people you're familiar with like Dana Lash, Collier Noir. Until very recently, Oliver North, the NRA's president, was getting paid some $1 million a year through Ackerman.
Now, it's interesting. I was wondering because I know a lot of NRA members. I grew up with NRA members. I mean, in fact, I grew up in Mississippi and Alabama and Georgia and Northwest Florida. So I was surrounded in the pews of First Baptist churches of all the time. They were all NRA members.
Right.
But then I see people coming on and threatening journalists and basically saying, one actually said to us, your time is running out, and they turn over an hourglass. I sat there thinking,
why?
I understand why lobbyists in D.C. would do that, but what about all those people sitting in the pews? Do they really want death threats against journalists? And what your report showed was that actually this approach offended a lot of NRA members.
It did.
They're like, talk about guns, don't threaten people's lives.
Well, there's a good portion of NRA. I think people tend to look at NRA membership as a monolith, and it's not. And there's a good deal of members that are primarily concerned with gun education, safety, training, hunting, and those are the people empirically on paper that are being neglected.
And by the way, let's just say it, gun rights.
Right.
But again, they don't want what the NRA TV's been delivering for the most part, and making what, $40 million a year doing it. A lot of people getting rich off of something that's actually driving away members.
That's right. I don't think their primary concern is being at the vanguard of the culture wars, and I think that they do care about gun rights in as much as they want to be able to have firearms to hunt or to go to the range sometimes. But that's not really that's not what gun culture is about for them. They're not interested necessarily in carrying their handgun in public or being able to bring their handgun into a government building or a bar or wherever it is now that you're able to carry a handgun on college campuses.
Mike, there's been sort of a building narrative over the last few months that the NRA may be losing some of its power because of some of what you report here, but also what's happening at the top of that organization and the disconnect with a lot of its membership. Is that an accurate and a fair narrative that the NRA is perhaps not as powerful as it used to be?
I think that is true. I mean, I think that the gun violence prevention groups on the other side have built up infrastructure that's not quite there yet, but it's definitely on pace to match what the NRA has been building over a number of years.
Well, you said match, but they actually outspent the NRA in 2018, right?
That's correct.
Pretty significantly.
Very significant. I mean, so that was the other thing I was going to say, actually, which is that because the NRA has put itself in this dire financial state with its profligate spending, its self-dealing, et cetera, it can't actually afford to spend on elections the way it was, or especially the way it did in 2016.
Quick question. If I'm a member of the NRA, I'm a dues-paying member of the NRA, Ackerman McQueen gets $40 million a year?
Yeah. Well, that was just one complete year. We can account for more than $40 million was paid to this.
How much of my dues goes to them?
Well, I guess it's hard to. I don't have like the exact accounting sheet in front of me. But yes, it is. I mean, to be very clear, the NRA is very bad at cultivating big money single donors, so the vast majority of its revenue is coming from its small dues-paying members.
And they're increasing dues, aren't they? Because of the financial self-dealing and mismanagement.
Yeah, they've had to do it a couple years in a row after not having done it for some 20 years. So they're very reliant on that group, and it's very important for them to keep them involved and to continue to buy their memberships and other products.
I'm going to go to Sam, but I've always tried to explain this to people because you hear about the NRA, and you're really talking about Wayne LaPierre, Chris Cox, and maybe one other person in Washington, D.C. You're talking about D.C. lobbyists.
Right.
And then you take a poll of NRA members, and you'll see 60, 70% increase of NRA members support increased background checks.
Right.
Almost a majority a ban on military-style assault weapons. There is this massive disconnect between the 3 Washington lobbyists who are getting rich preaching gun rights and the millions of members who are the NRA.
Yeah, I think that that's basically true. I mean, I think one of the issues, coming back to Ackerman McQueen, and to be clear, this is just the most prominent example of the issues that the NRA has. There's a number of vendors and contractors and other arrangements that go beyond just what Ackerman McQueen provides, but their messaging definitely forces the lobbyists into positions that they might not otherwise take, which is really interesting, which is why NRA lobbyists, the ones you don't know, frequently complain about the very extreme messaging that it doesn't really have. There's no oversight, basically. It happens. It goes out into the world. People think Dana Lash is a lobbyist, which is really interesting.
And she got paid $1 million by them to do
something near that, yeah.
To threaten people's lives. All right, or at least it looks like she's threatening people's lives.
Hourglass.
Hourglass, your time is running out. Yeah, I think most people
I'll take that as a threat.
Getting paid $1 million to threaten people's lives. By the way, that not only hurts membership, that hurts them on Capitol Hill. I've heard it specifically, that instead of worrying about gun culture threatening journalists' lives, not really a good marketing move. Sam Stein.
Well, thoughts and prayers to the NRA. Secondarily, I do agree with the general consensus here, which is that the group essentially has left its roots. And we had someone at the recent convention in Indianapolis doing some reporting, talking to people who drove 4 hours, 5 hours just to be there, and watch this drama unfold as all this spending was brought to the surface, and wonder what exactly the NRA was doing. They want them to focus on gun rights, and they feel like they've become a cultural institution. And so this really started in the 90s during the assault weapon bans and accelerated obviously in the Obama era when the group was focused on things like the knockout game. And just as one example of what a cultural force it became, the NRA in 2016 did a $2 million television advertisement on Benghazi. I get that Benghazi was an important electoral issue, but I have trouble figuring out what the ties to gun rights. And so when you watch all this happen, what essentially is taking place is that the NRA essentially raises money by becoming an institution at the vanguard of the culture wars. It then has all this money and it spends it in insane ways, and now it's coming back to bite them, basically.
It is. The NRA's newly elected president has decided to continue the tradition of Washington lobbyists, gun lobbyists, and say really stupid things that hurt the group's members politically. And it's taken a hard line on the political debate happening in our own backyard. Longtime Georgia resident Carolyn Meadows has set the NRA's focus on flipping her home congressional district from blue to red. Democratic Congresswoman, the one from the 6th District, Lucy McBath, actually won her victory in last year's midterm elections. She is an African-American who campaigned on gun violence reform in a majority-white district after her son Jordan was shot to death. In an interview with the Marietta Daily Journal, Meadows said that it was wrong to say, quote, the reason McBath won was because of her anti-gun stance. That didn't have anything to do with it. It was because she was a minority female.
Wow.
Congresswoman McBath has since pushed back in a series of tweets laced with photos of her dead son. McBath wrote this, too. I won the race because after my son was senselessly murdered in 2012, I stood up to do something about it. In a statement to the Washington Post, Meadows apologized to McBath for her comments. So, Yamiche, it just seems, again, these lobbyists in Washington, D.C. are all getting incredibly wealthy, running the NRA into the ground, and sticking the bill to rank-and-file members.
That sounds exactly as what Mike's reporting says. I will say very quickly on the idea that the NRA president was talking about Lucy McBath and saying that she was only elected because she was a minority female. I've known Lucy McBath for many years, interviewed her several times, and the death of her son, Jordan, was really something that obviously changed her life, but really spurred her into action. And she talked about her story on the campaign trail. She was someone who was very clear about her message that guns needed to be really looked at and the gun issues needed to be looked at. So I think just to say that, then that president to say that, I think the NRA president in some ways going into the cultural wars that the organization has been known for. So she's embracing this idea that the NRA can go past guns and really ask people, what do you want America to be? And in this case, she's almost saying, if you're a minority female, you're somehow getting handed something that you don't deserve. Adding to that, this reporting by Mike is simply breathtaking.
It is.
There's one of the things that's really important is the idea that there are people close to NRA executives making money off of the organization. There's someone's father, someone's wife, someone's significant other. They're all making money. So it's not even just the executives, but they're also bringing in people close to them and saying, here's some money from the NRA too.
Yeah. You know, Eddie, it's interesting on social issues like gay marriage, abortion, gun rights. Sometimes people act like those are static debates, right, that they don't move. Well, same-sex marriage began moving when the culture was starting to change, and it was not just what we saw on TV. It was that more and more people were actually coming out and telling their friends that they had a significant other they'd like to marry, and culture changed radically, just like that. The same thing with abortion, which a lot of Americans have become more conservative on abortion, support limits at 20 weeks. And that's because 3D imagery. That's because you can go into the womb and you can see at 20 weeks, I could see, as I've always said, I could see Jack's profile at 20 weeks. And you see the similarities between him now and how he was at 20 weeks. And he was a preemie, so we saw a lot of him, actually, while he was still in the womb. And it's the same thing with guns.
Right.
Like, I changed my view on background checks, wanted far more aggressive background checks and military-style assault weapons and a lot of other things, not just after Newtown, but that was after Virginia Tech and after Aurora and after it continued. And, maybe it took me too long, but at that point I said, this is a national epidemic. And I'm not alone. What I'm saying is there are a lot of people like me that might score 100% on NRA scorecards back in the 1990s, who today are saying, yep, I'm glad Heller was decided the way it was. Right. Americans have a right to keep and bear arms, but there have to be rational limits because this is a growing crisis.
You know, Joe, I think you're right. Human beings are dynamic. That we can take in information and our views can change and evolve. It doesn't make us flip-floppers. It makes us thoughtful people. But I want to say that in light of the backdrop to Mike's reporting, it's just what happened in Colorado.
Right.
Right. There's a child dead, an 18-year-old boy dead. 8 injured.
A school traumatized.
A school traumatized.
Community of
again.
children traumatized.
And so the outsized influence.
And what about the young man in North Carolina that saved people in his classroom?
So
dead.
The outsized
today,
influence
forever.
of what seems to be corrupt people. Of who seem to be corrupt people, the outside influence on the culture, what Sam has said, how they've leveraged in interesting sorts of ways the culture wars for their own financial gain, right? The backdrop of what they're doing, how cynical and insidious, is a culture where guns can do this sort of damage. So as we talk about the corruption, as we talk about the state of the NRA, we need to understand the damage that is being done and has been done, and keep in mind what has happened at that STEM school in Colorado. And my heart goes out to the parents of the child who died.
And what happened at UNC
exactly.
Charlotte. And, you know, we see this in so many hot button issues where extremists get control and will gin it up to make money, profits. And here again, I just want to keep underlining it, and tell me if I'm wrong. When we talk about the, quote, NRA that most people talk about, they're not talking about the millions of members. Right. They're talking about 3 lobbyists who have taken millions of people's dollars, and they and their families have gotten incredibly rich, and they've run this organization into the ground financially.
Right, and you use the word cynical and insidious, which is basically, I think, the perfect way to describe it. It's some of the people you've mentioned. It's a larger pool than that. It's most of the NRA's executives. I mean, someone was mentioning before, talking about one executive in particular who was giving payouts to his dad, to his former business partner, to other people who were related to him, others giving payouts to people, friends, family. I mean, there's an endless amount of benefits that seem to come along with being connected to a top NRA official. And the question you have to ask yourself when we're talking about these horrible incidents is what is this whole debate about? What is it all for? And the worst possible answer is that it could be for self-enrichment. And that is what it starts to feel like as you examine documents that were created by the NRA's own accountants, specifically. This isn't like coming from me. This isn't my opinion. Right. This isn't anonymous sources. This is paper created by the NRA's own accountants saying, here are all these problems that have to do with our vendors, our contractors, our executives who are finding ways to pad their pockets, and we don't really understand it. We don't get how the cash flows, and we're the ones who are supposed to know how the cash flows.
Sam, there are people inside the NRA that are actually saying there's something rotten in Denmark. There is a real problem here.
Well, and Joe, to your point, people don't remember the early years of the Obama administration, but he was incredibly reluctant to do anything on guns for years and years. It really took to Newtown for him to weigh in on the issue. And now you see in the Democratic Party virtually no one, with a few exceptions, having any hesitation whatsoever embracing gun reform laws. And that's because, in part, of the changing political dynamics, the cultural dynamics, but it's also a reaction to the NRA's decision to align itself so much with one political party, to get so in bed with the Trump campaign. It made a historic expenditure for Trump's election, that Democrats no longer, they used to feel like they had to at least feign interest in gun rights, or at least align themselves with the NRA. They no longer feel that way, and I think that's problematic for the institution itself in the long term.
Well,
Sam Stein.
You actually had Jack Murtha was a pro-gun guy, and John Dingell was a pro-gun guy. I mean, there were Democrats that, again, when the position wasn't so extreme, they're like, yeah, I can do that and go back to my constituents and win. Bernie Sanders.
Harry Landrieu. I mean, there's plenty. Yeah.
Sam Stein, thank you. Mike Spies will be reading the new reporting on the NRA at NewYorker.com. Thank you very much for being on.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up, it is a stunning chart from the New York Times detailing Donald Trump's financial losses over the course
roller coaster?
of a decade.
Goes straight
No, because a
down.
roller
Don't-
coaster
don't
goes
roller
up and
coaster.
down.
Yeah, exactly.
Steve Ratner knows a thing or two about charts. He joins us ahead. Plus, a real-life story that sounds a lot like the plot of a movie, and it might actually become one.
Oh my God! Have you seen
This
this
is
story?
incredible.
Oh, my
New York
Lord.
Magazine is detailing how a grown man moved onto a college campus and began manipulating a group of his daughter's classmates. This unbelievable story.
He shattered their lives.
Next on Morning Joe.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.